Hello, my name's Jackie and welcome back to my channel. And because the decade is coming to a close, I thought it would be fun to do like a decade in review type of video. Mainly because I've seen people doing decades in reviews on Instagram, so why not? So I'm going to divide this video into a couple of different sections. So the first will be what actually happened in the last decade. The next one will be regrets / frustrations from that time. The next one will be lessons learned, and then the final section will be what I'm grateful for. So if you're not really interested in hearing about the logistics of the last decade, I will put a time somewhere on the screen so you can skip ahead, and I'll also have timestamps in the doobly-doo below. So I've actually written a list of what's happened over the last decade to make sure I don't forget anything. 2010 was the year I moved to Paris, and let's take a step back actually, because I finished university at the end of 2007, and then I went straight from my exams to moving to London. So in December 2007 I moved to London, and I was there for about 18 months and had a really good time. And then when I went back home to Australia and started looking for work, I really struggled to find work, and I think it was a combination of the fact that I had all of one job on my resume, and it was also, post GFC time, so a little bit of a difficult time for new graduates. So what I ended up doing was, I'm very lucky to have a very successful, very well-connected mother who was able to get me a contracting role with some of her former colleagues / friends. So I was in this administrative sort of role where I ended up doing some internal comms stuff because I was a writer, but it wasn't really fulfilling. I was just biding my time there. So this is where I am at the beginning of 2010. I had decided at this stage that I was ready to go to Paris. I wanted to get a working holiday visa, go there for a year and teach English. And I think I told my then boss as early as February, but because one of the requirements for the visa was getting a police check, I believe, and Victoria Police had this huge backlog, I ended up waiting for like 6 weeks or something ridiculous to get my police check done before I could even apply for the visas. So I didn't end up leaving until around May or June, which meant my poor employers at the time, they wanted to give me more stuff, and I'm like, well, do you really want to give me more stuff when I'm leaving? So very sorry about that. But I ended up going to Paris for a year where I lived and taught English, and then 2011 was when I went back home. And things happened really quickly when I got back home, actually. Within 3 weeks, I think it was, I found a job as an SEO copywriter, which basically meant I was writing articles every day and publishing them under different names with links that pointed back to my company's website, so it looked like, in Google's eyes, we were an authority in that space. I also met my then boyfriend, now husband, just around the same time, so it was within a month of me getting back to Australia. So things seemed to be going really well, but within 2 or 3 months I started getting a bit frustrated at work. I felt like I'd already hit the ceiling. I'd learned everything I needed to learn to do that role really well, and there wasn't anywhere else for me to move from there. Then later, so I worked at an Australian office of a company where headquarters is in the UK, and they decided to start re-centralizing their marketing stuff. So when I started, I had all of this stuff to do, and then maybe 5 or 6 months in, they re-centralized back to London, and suddenly I had nothing to do. Like when I started, I was doing 5-6 articles a day, and in my last couple of months, I was doing 3 a week. And I was just so bored and so frustrated. So I ended up looking for another job. And in 2012, I went on to another copywriting type of job for an online education company. And what was interesting about this one was that there was much more work to do. It was much more interesting work. I was more interested in the education space. I really liked a lot of the people on the team, but still within 2 or 3 months, I started getting really frustrated again and wanted to do something else. And if I'd been single at the time, I probably would have gotten another working holiday visa for somewhere else and gone and taught English for another year and just flitted from country to country until I was ready to settle down. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I was with Drew and didn't want to throw out my relationship with this really great guy just because I was a bit frustrated at work. And this was what sent me down the path of entrepreneurship and starting my own business. So the back end of 2012, I was doing a lot of learning, a lot of online courses, a lot of research. I was trying to get some freelance copywriting work, but really struggled to figure out how to break into the market. And this brings us to 2013, where I was still frustrated in the same job, and I decided to enroll in a very expensive business coaching program called Become a Key Person of Influence. And this program was actually what started my business. So I started the program wanting to get a start at freelance copywriting and build up more of my clients and figure out how to market this new business. But the program is structured around becoming a leader in your industry, and they have 5 different steps you're expected to complete. And one of those steps is writing and self-publishing a book, because when you're a published author, you automatically have more credibility. So I was in this group of, I think, 55 people who weren't writers, who all had to write books, and I was a writer. So I asked the mentor host of the program whether I could stand up at the end of one of the days and pitch myself for editing services. So I pitched my services to the room. That led to my first couple of clients, and then I started getting referrals from within the community, and that's what led to me starting Grammar Factory. So I think I got my first client, my first editing client, in around April or May of 2013, and then at the end of that year I decided I had enough business that I was going to try doing it full time. So this brings us to 2014, which is my first year of doing my business full-time. I also went traveling for 3.5 months, because one of the goals of working for myself was to be able to live and work from anywhere. So I did a 3.5-month backpacking trip through, starting in Morocco, then going through the Middle East and finishing in India, which was amazing. And I basically freelanced part-time the entire time. So that was, if there's ever a time in the past decade when I was living my dream life, that was probably it. So I did my big travel and then got back to Australia, and then business started getting really busy. So from the beginning of 2014 to the beginning of 2017, I was doing Grammar Factory full time. During that time, I hired, I think, 5 different editors and 2 designers, and my assistant, I started working with him on freelance transcription services, and he was so amazing that I employed him to do more and more work for me, basically. Hi, Jake, if you're watching. So for those few years, business was both going really well and both not going really well. So it was going really well in the sense that the team kept growing, we kept getting more clients, our services expanded, and our revenue kept going up every year. It wasn't going so well in the sense that even though our revenue was going up, our profit wasn't. I also couldn't figure out how to structure things so that I could work as the business owner rather than being the one who was actually doing the editing and ghostwriting work, which I enjoyed, but it got to the stage where I was finding the running the business side of things more fulfilling than the writing and editing, and I was also just getting quite burnt out because I was doing so much writing and editing all the time. The other thing was that I was a bit isolated, so when you work from home constantly, you do lose the social connection of going and meeting with people every day. And I think the other thing was that it was going well enough for me to get lazy. So because I was working from home and didn't have that much external structure, and because I was burnt out and didn't have that much energy, I found myself not using my time very well. So one example is that if I had free time, I was spending hours of the day on YouTube. When I had an editing project scheduled, even though I had 3 weeks to look at the book, I would often leave it until the last 5 days because I knew I could get it done in that time if I had to. So at the beginning of 2017, I decided I actually wanted to get another corporate job. And the main reason for that was because I thought that if I had this 8 hours a day that was just unavailable, that would force me to become really efficient and really organized with the rest of my time. So at the beginning of 2017, I got a job as content marketing manager for a marketing company, which was interesting. I think it was good to have the structure again. It was nice to have some extra money again. I think it took some pressure off Drew because he was paying the lion's share of our living expenses while I got the business up and running. I think it was good for him because it meant I got home and talked about something that wasn't just the business. But the company was going through a stage of transition where it was shrinking every year, which meant that basically every 3 months there was a round of redundancies. So 3 months after I started, there was a round of redundancies. My role was safe, but my manager was ousted. And then 3 months later, there was another round of redundancies where my role was cut. From there, I was very lucky to very quickly find a contracting role, which was not really a career role. It was more website administration, so having to create web pages and make changes to the website for a company when they were requested, rather than anything strategic. But it was good in the sense that the people were lovely, the workspace was lovely. It gave me some time to recover from that blow of being made redundant, which I think affected me much more than I realized at the time. And it gave me some time to start thinking about Estonia. So where are we now? We're in late 2017, early 2018. And then in August of 2018 was when I moved to Estonia. So the story around that is that, and I will put a link to a blog post in the doobly-doo for more detail, but basically in mid-2017 I was at a business conference and I got home to my room at the end of the workshops one day and had a message from Drew on my phone that said, "Let's move to Estonia." And I was like, okay, let's talk about this when I get home. This is very random. And the story behind this is that I'd been wanting to move back to Europe for years. Now, as you've probably gathered, I had a bit of a frustrating experience in corporate. I had really been wanting to travel again for ages. And so we'd sort of been talking about it on and off. And then when I was away on this conference, I think Drew was struggling with work and he just had this moment where he'd sort of gotten to breaking point and he was like, okay, I'm sorry I wasn't ready before, but I'm ready now. Let's find somewhere to move. And he happened to see an ad on Instagram for a company called Skoro, which is a startup based in Estonia. And he started Googling and discovered that Estonia is where Skype was founded. It's where TransferWise is founded, Taxify and Bolt, so a whole lot of big names. And it's this Silicon Valley of Europe. It's a real startup hub with lots of international companies who are looking to hire international specialists. So we saw this and thought, okay, this could actually be a good option for us. We're both too old for working holiday visas now. And maybe a country like this would be willing to sponsor us to come over. So we had this plan in the back of our minds and we were actually saving towards it because we knew we'd need some capital to cover our expenses back home and to get us over there. So we'd been saving for it. And then in mid-2018, he sent me a job ad one day, which was for a content marketing manager at a financial company in Estonia. And I had just broken my foot at the time, actually. I went trampolining without adult supervision and ended up with 2 fractures in my foot. And so I'd been stuck on the couch for something like 4 days and was feeling very depressed and very sorry for myself. And I sent an application on a whim, and the next day I had a request for an interview, and within 7 days I had a job offer and they wanted me to move over in 6 weeks. So that's how Estonia happened. So at the end of August I moved to Estonia in 2018. Drew joined me about 2 months later after packing up our lives back home, and he needed to tie up some things with work as well. And yeah, 2018 was the year we moved to Estonia, where we still are over a year later. This brings us to 2019, which is this year, and honestly, of the last decade, this has probably been the biggest year in terms of, I want to say in terms of transformation, but that doesn't really ring true because from an outsider's perspective, where I am now, December 2019, is exactly where I was in December 2018. So still living in Estonia, still have the same marriage, still have the same job. So what has changed? So I went to a Mind Valley event in May of this year, the end of May, and one of the workshops was a journaling workshop where we did this exercise and you have to answer 17 different points. And I'll find the exercise online and put a link below in case you want to try it. One of the points was, where do you want to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And I immediately knew I wanted to be writing fiction, and in 3 to 5 years I want my first book to be out. I want to have other books on submission and want to be making a career for myself as a fiction author. And then you needed to go to your future self in 3 to 5 years and ask them, what did you need to change or let go of in order to achieve those 3 to 5 year goals? And my future self said I needed to let go of my business. So I needed to let go of Grammar Factory, which was not what I was expecting. In fact, this event, the theme of it was expand your influence. So I thought, perfect, I can claim this as a business expense. There'll be lots of people there who are wanting to write books. I'll get new clients out of it. And instead, on morning 2, I get this message saying, no, it's time to let this business go. And yeah, at the end of a few days, I realized it was time to let Grammar Factory go. So I originally was just planning to wrap it up, but then someone at the event said, look, why don't you try selling it? You've put all of this work into it. And I actually didn't think it would sell. I thought the business was too tied to me. There were too many flaws. Profit, we hadn't had a great year actually. Last year was really good, but this year hadn't been so good. So I thought, it's not really an attractive asset for a buyer. But I thought, what the hell? So I listed it on a couple of different business sales sites, and quite quickly I had a gentleman called Scott reach out to me who thought the business sounded great. It was exactly the field he wanted to get into. And over a couple of months, we negotiated the sale, which was finalized in September. At the same time, because I knew I wanted to start writing again, I did Camp NaNoWriMo in July and finally picked up a book that had basically been in my head for 10 years. I did the first draft when I was 19. So in July, I did Camp NaNoWriMo, got back to this draft and spent July, August, and September working on it. Finished it at the end of September. I'm still very scared of looking at it. It is in a drawer and I don't really want to see. I don't want to see what I've done. I know it's a mess. And then October was preparing for NaNoWriMo, and at the time of filming this video, I'm still working on the NaNoWriMo project. So even though things from the outside haven't changed, this year I let go of a business that was taking up all of this mental and creative space that was stopping me from writing. I started writing again after over 10 years of wanting to be a writer. And because of those two changes, what I found is I'm so much happier at work in my day job, even though the job hasn't changed. And I'm even happier living in Estonia, whereas as recently as 6 months ago, I was anxious to leave. I felt really trapped. I wanted to go traveling again. And I was planning to resign from my job on the 18th of December and give a month's notice, and then I was going to go traveling for 6 months, which 18th of December has come and gone, and I feel like I don't need to. I feel like I could easily stay here for another 3, 6, maybe 12 months, just because I finally started doing what I really wanted to be doing again. So that's a recap of what's happened in the last decade. So the next thing I wanted to cover was regrets/frustrations. I don't like the word regret because that implies that, I wish something had never happened, and obviously the way things have turned out is perfect. It's made me into the person I am today. I've had so many good experiences because of the way things have turned out, and I've learnt so much because of the way things have turned out. But if I could do it again, there are certain things I'd do differently. So what I've written down is, the first one is not keeping up with my writing. I really struggled with this as soon as I started to work professionally as a copywriter, which has been my entire career. I've been writing since I left university. And I always said it was just because I was so creatively drained. And one of the reasons why I wanted to start the business was so I could have this income generating asset that would free me up to be able to write, not realizing that would also take creative and mental energy. Having said that, like I said in my last video about writing when you work full time, there's a good chance that if I waited to have the time to write, if I waited until I was no longer writing for a living, then I probably never would have started writing again. And now that I know that I can write a little bit a day, most days of the week, to keep learning, to keep producing things, I really wish I'd done it earlier. And it frustrates me because I think, God, if I'd kept writing from when I was 21 years old to now, I'd have an extra 12 years of writing experience under my belt. I'd probably be decent. But there's nothing I can do about that now. It's just a frustration. The next one I've written down was actually related to Grammar Factory. So I loved running a business. I loved having a team. I loved the clients I worked with and the books I worked on. It was such a good experience having this business, and there are so many things that I'm grateful for and so many things I learned from it. In hindsight, though, I realized that it wasn't set up well. It didn't have the foundations to grow the way I wanted it to. If I'd made a few different decisions early on, it would have been in a much better position earlier this year, and I might not have had to sell it. So the big one I can think of is that at the end of 2014, I hired my first editors, and what I should have done was actually doubled my prices. And so I should have started by doubling my prices and seen if the demand was still there, and then if it was, then I could have hired editors. And the benefit of doing it in that order is because my prices would have been so much higher, there would have been extra cash flow, so I could have cut back on my own workload and focused on training the editors and reviewing all of their work, because whenever I hired anyone, I spent. So they first did trial books, which was usually a month or two of work, and then for about 6 months I would review everything they edited. So that's quite a bit of extra work beyond what I was already doing. Now, because I didn't raise my rates though, I needed to keep up all of my own editing work to ensure there was enough cash flow to cover all of this. The other thing was that when they started, I was paying them hourly but charging a flat rate to clients, so I was actually losing money on the work that they did. And one of the problems was that even though I realized this wasn't working, I only increased our rates incrementally, like it was $100 or $200 at a time, which wasn't enough to make a difference. And it meant that for a good 3 years, maybe 4 years even, I was constantly on the back foot with the business, and I felt like I could never get ahead financially, and no wonder I felt so burnt out. Whereas by the time I did get my head screwed on straight and realized what I needed to be charging, it was the end of 2017, and by that point it was probably a little bit too late for me. I'd already mentally checked out a bit. Another regret / frustration is letting myself get so out of shape. So I'm not overweight by any means, but and honestly I've never been an athlete or anything, but when I was in school I did a lot of ballet, I did a lot of karate, and I was much more active than I am now. And then when I started working, especially when I started the business, I basically stopped doing anything. And over the past year or so I have been going to the gym and have been trying to get back into shape. But one of the things I feel when I look at myself and I see how out of breath I get, even still after a year, and I look at myself and think, God, if only I'd, just kept it up rather than letting it go. And the final regret is I wish I hadn't been so fixated on making it or being successful. So you might have picked up on the fact that I felt like I needed to make it financially before I could write. I needed to have enough money sitting there to support me so then I'd be free to write. And I think part of that might just be me and having, lack of trust in the universe, or maybe lack of trust in my ability to manage multiple things. I think part of it's also the family I was raised in, which is both of my parents are in IT, my sister and brother are both in IT, so very corporate family, very stable careers. And then I'm the creative one who wants to be an artist. And I think that meant that I spent all of my 20s so focused on figuring out my career and figuring out my finances and trying to get ahead that I didn't really take the time to be in my 20s. And now I look back and go, God, I wish I'd partied more. I wish I'd slept with more people. I wish I'd traveled and not worried about wasting time, because at the end of it, that wouldn't have been a waste. And there's no reason why I can't do that now, I suppose, but I think it's a little different when you're a bit younger and you do have more freedom. And now I don't have the same level of freedom. Like, I have a husband who I love very much, but I have a husband, so I have commitments. We've got a house back home that we need to pay the mortgage on. Maybe there'll be a time when I have that freedom again, maybe when we win the lotto or when I get $1 million book advance. But who knows when that'll be, and sometimes I feel like I lost that opportunity a little bit. So the next section is lessons that I've learned from the last decade. The first and the biggest one, which I just learned in the last year, is that I don't need to fix the world around me to be satisfied and happy and fulfilled, or whichever word you want to put there. Like I said earlier, where I am now from the outside is almost exactly where I was a year ago. I still have the same marriage, I still live in the same apartment, I still have the same job, I still live in the same city. And yet my level of satisfaction and contentment with this life is, through the roof. This time last year, I was thinking about whether I could survive here for another year before resigning from my job and going traveling. Now, I'm perfectly content to stay here. I'm really enjoying work. I love my team. I'm enjoying the city. I love my husband. And it's because I started writing again. And yes, I've established some other more positive mental thought patterns as well, but the big part is that I always wanted to write and I was frustrated that I wasn't writing, and simply incorporating that into my existing life means I'm so much happier in my existing life. I didn't need to throw away everything in order to be happy. So big positive lesson learned. The next lesson is that it's better late than never. And you would have noticed from my frustrations, the main ones were, why did I let everything go? Why did I let these things that were important to me go? And now I'm playing catch up. And that is frustrating, and it's probably going to be frustrating for the next couple of years until I make up for that lost time. But it's better to do it late than never. And another thing I said in my video last week about working full-time is that Chinese proverb about how the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago and the second best time is today. And yes, it would have been better if I'd kept writing over the last 10 years. It would have been better if I'd stayed in shape over the last 10 years. But I didn't. And the second best time is to realize that now and to start today. Lesson number 3 is not getting caught up in the noise. So I think one of the reasons why I was so frantic and why I put so much pressure on myself to succeed earlier in my 20s was because I was getting caught up in the noise. I was looking at all of these people on social media and even people I connected with in my day-to-day life because I was so in that business world, and seeing how successful they were and how much it looked like they'd got it made, that I felt like I was falling behind. And the truth is, you don't know what's happening in their life. None of us do. I see people who have really successful businesses today, but maybe their health isn't so great, or maybe their relationships aren't so great, or maybe everything's great and then I can just be happy for them. But the truth is that it doesn't really matter how anyone else is doing. It only matters how I'm doing, or in your case, it only matters how you're doing and your level of happiness, and whether with your happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction with your life is either steady or on an upward trajectory. As long as you are doing better than you were yesterday, then it doesn't matter how anyone else is doing. So learning to cut out the noise has been really helpful. And I think the final lesson is that it's okay for me to want what I want. Sorry, I'm actually getting a little bit emotional, which I wasn't expecting I'd do in this video. So I've mentioned a couple of times that I always wanted to write. And one of the reasons why I didn't pursue that was because when I was in school, and I'm not putting the entire blame for this on my dad, because my dad's wonderful, but I remember being maybe 16 in school and, talking about what you want and telling Dad that I wanted to be a writer. And he's like, oh, well, that's all very well and good, but how are you going to make money? And I think that comment was one of the reasons why I got so fixated on getting these copywriting jobs and finding some way to make it as a writer in corporate. And it's one of the reasons why I got so focused on the business and so focused on all of these other things, and so focused on trying to make it. And in the past year, I've realized it is okay to want what I want. It is okay to want to be a fiction writer, even if that doesn't mean it's going to be a career, even if it means I never get a book published or I never earn enough from it to pay the bills. I can still write and I can still want to write. So yeah, it's okay to want what you want. And the final section is gratitude. So what am I grateful for as this decade comes to a close? The first thing is my husband, Drew. We met in June 2011, so it's coming up to 9 years now. So he has been here for most of the last decade, and he's seen the ups and downs. He's seen me try job after job and get frustrated time and time again. He's seen me go flitting off for 3.5-month backpacking trips without him. He's seen me struggle to get a business up and running and then make the decision to let go of it after 6.5 years. And he's seen me decide to start writing, and through it all he's been so supportive and so loving. So number one thing on the list is that I'm very thankful for Drew. The next thing I'm grateful for is, and I know this probably isn't politically correct, but is my level of freedom and privilege. I'm aware that a lot of the frustrations and things I've spoken about from the last decade, they are incredibly privileged things to be frustrated about. And I know there are a lot of people in the world who don't have the luxury of being dissatisfied with a job, or who want to be writing and are frustrated that they don't get to. Like these, like I am aware that I'm so privileged to have these as my worries, and yeah, even though it might not be the right thing to say, I think it's important to be grateful for that level of privilege, and grateful that these are the things I get to be frustrated about. The next thing I'm grateful for is my current job, and honestly, a year ago I probably wouldn't have said this, so I'm actually really grateful to be feeling grateful about my working situation. The role I'm in is incredibly big and rewarding. So my title is head of content, and I've seen other head of content roles at other companies that don't seem to have the level or breadth of responsibilities that I have in my role. I get to work on such a wide portfolio of things. I have an amazing team, and an amazing diverse team actually. So I'm Australian. The people reporting into me are Iranian, American/Cuban, Nigerian, Estonian, and British. So it's just amazing to work on such a diverse team and get all of these different perspectives. And I have a very supportive boss, which is wonderful, who really came through for me in the last week actually when something went wrong with bonuses in my team. And then there's the fact that this company interviewed me over Skype while I was in Australia and was happy to bring me over to Estonia from Australia for this role. Like, that's incredible. So I've had so much support in this role, and even if I haven't always been grateful for it, I am very grateful for it now. I'm also grateful for writing, and even though it's frustrating, and even though I have a long way to go, and I have lots of days when I struggle and I look at my stuff and it's nowhere near where I want it to be, and the words on the page are nowhere near to capturing what I see in my head, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to write, and that writing is something that can fit around all of these other things in my life. And finally, I'm grateful to you. So it's only been like a couple of months that I've been on YouTube, but for those of you who are watching, yeah, I really appreciate you watching these videos, so thank you. That is all from me today. If you're still with me, thank you for sticking with me until the end. I'm pretty sure once I edit this is going to be a lengthy video. In the comments below, I'd love to hear about your decades in review. So what were the frustrating things that you experienced? What are the lessons you've learned from them, and what are you grateful for today? Other than that, if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.